The morning light fell in pale sheets through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a tower on Madison Avenue, slow and golden across the polished marble. Daniel Carr sat alone on a leather bench outside a glass conference room in a plain white shirt, his hands folded quietly over his knees. No briefcase, no lanyard, nothing on him that spoke of power. Inside, beyond the tinted pane, a woman in charcoal silk tilted her head back in laughter, a soft, practiced laugh that did not quite reach her eyes. A pale blue glow rose behind her, some logo stretched wide across the far wall, too far for him to read, close enough for him to feel. The receptionist did not know his face. The executive assistant glanced at him twice, decided he was no one worth remembering, and walked on. 6 minutes. That was all it took. 2 weeks before the morning he would sit on a leather bench in a tower that no longer remembered him. Daniel Carr stood at the kitchen counter of a colonial house on the outskirts of Boston, listening to the coffee maker tick and the sound of small feet pattering down the stairs. Noah came first, always. 6 years old, still in pajamas printed with little blue rockets, his hair cow-licked from sleep. Emma followed 8, and already trying to be taller than her years, clutching a folded piece of construction paper tight against her chest. "Daddy," she said, "I drew Mommy. But don't look yet. I'm not finished." Daniel crouched and kissed the top of her head. "I won't look." These were the hours that had become his religion. Waffles cut into squares, Noah's milk poured to the exact line he insisted on, Emma's hair braided with hands that had once written the first lines of code for a company now worth $15 billion. 5 winters had passed since Daniel had last sat behind a desk in Manhattan. 5 winters since Martin had squeezed his shoulder in a hospital bed and told him, voice rasping through the oxygen mask, that 2 small children could not afford to lose both parents. "Go home," Martin had said. "Go home and raise them. Vivian will hold the line." Daniel had believed him. Pinnacle Systems had been born in 2008 in a 1-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on Amsterdam Avenue, where Daniel and Martin Cole used to eat cold pizza at 3 in the morning and argue about whether a piece of software could actually change the way hospitals spoke to one another. They were 29 and broke. They were also, as Martin liked to say with a tired grin, stupid enough to think they could win. For the first 4 years, the company was nothing more than a clever idea stitched together by 2 friends, too stubborn to quit. Then came the night in 2012 when a pharmaceutical giant offered to buy them out for a sum that would have made both of them millionaires many times over. Martin had turned the offer down over the phone without consulting anyone. That same evening, he drove his old Volvo to Daniel's apartment, woke him up at midnight, and spread a stack of draft papers across the kitchen table. "I'm writing something into our charter," Martin had said. Article 9, Section 2, a founder's clause. If anyone ever tries to sell this company in a way that betrays what we built it for, the majority founder can freeze the whole thing. No board vote, no committee. 1 signature and the deal dies. Daniel had laughed. "Martin, go home. Go to bed." Martin had not smiled back. "There are doors you have to lock while your mind is still clear, because the day the traitor walks in, you won't have time to lock them anymore. You worry too much." "I'm not worried about today," Martin said. "I'm worried about the day you're not here to worry for yourself." The mission that Martin had been so desperate to protect did not yet exist in its final form. That came in 2020, the year the world held its breath, and the year Daniel's held its last. Sarah was 34. Emma was 2.5. Noah had been in the world for 6 months and had not yet spoken his first word. The pain in Sarah's back that she had blamed on carrying the baby was not a strained muscle. It was not a pulled ligament. By the time the 3rd hospital ran the right panel of tests and the words "pancreatic cancer" appeared at the top of a page, 3 different medical systems had looked at 3 different fragments of her chart without ever once speaking to one another, and the tumor had decided the rest. In the last hour of her life in a room on the 14th floor of Mass, General Sarah had taken Daniel's hand in both of hers. Her grip had been very light, her voice lighter still. "Don't let this happen to anyone else," she said. "Promise me." Pinnacle had been a profitable company before that night. After it, it became something else. Daniel and Martin rebuilt the core product from the foundation up an interoperable record system that forced hospitals to speak the same language whether they wanted to or not. Within 3 years, 19 of the 20 largest hospital networks in the country were running on it. The company crossed $10 billion in valuation and kept climbing. Then, 1 year after Sarah's funeral, Martin collapsed in the parking garage of the Pinnacle headquarters. A massive stroke, the doctors said. He lingered 4 days. On the 3rd day, when his speech had come partly back, he had asked for Daniel alone in the room. "The kids need you more than this company does," he said. "Promise me. Give the operations to Vivian. She's ready. She's been ready." Vivian Shaw had been Martin's protégé since 2011, pulled from a mid-tier consultancy, because in Martin's words, she saw around corners. She was brilliant. She was disciplined. By every measurable metric, she was the right choice. Daniel had kept his promise. He moved his children to Boston, set up the Pinnacle Foundation out of a small office above a bakery in Cambridge, and walked away from the tower on Madison Avenue without once looking back. 5 winters, waffles cut into squares, Emma's braids, Noah learning to ride a bike on the sidewalk, falling, getting up. The email arrived on a Tuesday. Daniel was at the kitchen table reviewing a grant application for a children's cancer program in Detroit when the notification chimed on his laptop. No sender name, no signature, only a subject line 4 words long. "They think you've let go." The attachment was 47 pages, internal Pinnacle financials that did not match the public filings. A draft acquisition memorandum from MedCorp Global, the pharmaceutical conglomerate, currently being sued by 4 state attorneys general for raising the price of insulin by 600%. Personal compensation schedules naming Vivian Shaw and the chief financial officer, Lawrence Pruitt, as the recipients of $180 million in combined bonuses, payable upon the closing of a sale priced $4 billion below the company's own valuation. Daniel read the document twice. Then he closed the laptop, walked out into the backyard, and stood in the cold for a long time without a coat. For 2 weeks he said nothing. He drove the children to school. He made dinner. He ran the numbers through 3 independent auditors under separate non-disclosure agreements, each unaware of the others. He pulled 2 years of internal board minutes through a law firm he had kept on a quiet retainer since the company went public. He compared timestamps, cross-referenced signatures, watched for any sign that the anonymous sender might be wrong. Everything held. On the 14th morning at 5:40, Daniel stood in the doorway of Emma's bedroom and watched his daughter sleep. The nightlight cast a soft spill of gold across her pillow. On her nightstand lay the drawing she had made of Sarah, taped into a small wooden frame. The color slightly faded from a year of sunlight. He had not really looked at the drawing on the day she had given it to him. He had been too afraid. He looked at it now. Emma had drawn her mother, not as she remembered her. She could not remember her. Not truly, she had been 2, but as she had assembled her from photographs and bedtime stories. A woman with long brown hair, green eyes, and a small scar above her left eyebrow that Daniel had once told her came from falling off a bicycle in the 4th grade. In the drawing, Sarah was holding a tiny heart in her cupped hands, and above the heart, in careful crayon letters, Emma had written, "For everyone." Daniel stepped back from the doorway, walked downstairs, and called his mother-in-law. By 7:30, she was at the house with an overnight bag. By 8, he was on a private charter out of Hanscom Field. By 10:15, he was stepping out of a town car onto the sidewalk of Madison Avenue in front of a glass tower that rose 60 stories into a sky the color of brushed steel. He wore a plain white shirt. He carried a worn canvas satchel with a single thin folder inside it, and in the inside pocket of his coat, a thumb drive holding everything. No briefcase, no lanyard, nothing on him that spoke of power. The revolving doors were the same. The marble floor was the same. The scent of the lobby lemon polish and something faintly floral from the arrangements at the security desk was the same. The wall behind the reception counter was not. Once 2 brass plates had hung there side by side, catching the morning light. Founded by Daniel Carr and Martin Cole, 2008. Now there was 1 plate larger, polished to a mirror shine. A decade of leadership under Vivian Shaw. Daniel stood in the middle of the lobby for perhaps 10 seconds. Then he walked to the reception desk. The young woman behind it looked up with the bright, rehearsed smile that companies of a certain size trained into their front staff. Her eyes scanned him, the shirt, the empty hands, the weathered satchel, and the smile cooled a single degree. "Good morning, sir. Do you have an appointment?" "I don't. I need to see Vivian Shaw." "I'm sorry, Ms. Shaw is in a closed session all morning. Is there someone else who can help you?" "Tell her Daniel is here." "Daniel. Just Daniel. She'll understand." The receptionist's smile thinned further. She lifted a receiver, murmured something into it, and set it down. A minute later, a young man came briskly across the lobby in his early 30s, in a slim navy suit with a pocket square folded too precisely. He did not offer his hand. "I'm Brandon Mills, executive assistant to Ms. Shaw. I understand you asked for her by name." "I did." Brandon's eyes performed the same quick survey the receptionists had. The shirt, the hands, the absence of every small signal that men in this building had been trained to recognize as power. "May I ask your relationship to Miss Shaw?" "I used to work here. The smallest of smiles, the kind that was not a smile at all." "I see. Miss Shaw is in the middle of a very important meeting. If you'd like to leave your contact information, I'll wait." "Sir, I really must." "I said I'll wait." A beat of silence lay between them like a thin sheet of glass. Then Brandon gestured with the crispness of a man escorting a delivery driver toward a row of leather benches along the hallway that led to the executive floor. "You're welcome to sit, but I can't promise she'll be available." "That's fine." Daniel walked down the hallway. At the far end, through a wall of tinted glass, he could see the long conference table and the woman in charcoal silk standing at its head. Behind her, on the far wall, a pale blue logo glowed against the dark. MedCorp Global. He could turn around now. He could step back into the town car, call his attorneys from the seat file an emergency injunction in a Delaware court by noon, and drag the whole thing into a 6-month war fought on paper while the sale closed somewhere above his head. Or he could sit on that bench and let the next 6 minutes decide the rest of his life. Daniel walked to the bench and sat. The bench was cold beneath him. He could feel the chill of the leather through the thin cotton of his shirt, the overnight air of the building not yet warmed by the long climb of the morning sun through the eastern windows. From where he sat, Daniel could see the length of the glass corridor, the tinted wall of the conference room at its far end, and beyond it, the vague blue movement of bodies. He did not recognize executives in dark suits leaning forward, leaning back, the small choreography of agreement. A minute passed, then another. No one looked at him. A woman with a tablet under her arm walked by without turning her head. 2 engineers went past, carrying paper cups of coffee, laughing about something that had happened in a staff meeting that morning. A man in shirt sleeves adjusted the knot of his tie as he passed, caught his own reflection in the glass beside the bench, and kept walking. To all of them, Daniel was furniture, a vendor waiting for a signature, a building contractor sent to measure something, a nobody. Brandon Mills reappeared once at the far end of the corridor, said something to a colleague, and glanced over with a small crease of irritation between his eyebrows, as if wondering why the nobody on the bench had not yet done the polite thing and given up. Then he turned and walked the other way. Daniel took his phone from his pocket and checked the time. 10:23. The screen lit beneath his thumb, and the lock image bloomed open the way it always did. A photograph he had taken 3 Sundays ago from the kitchen doorway, the one he could not bring himself to change. Emma sat cross-legged on the living room rug in a patch of late morning sun, a plastic toy comb in her hand, working very seriously at Noah's hair. Noah sat in front of her legs, splayed, mouth wide in a gap-toothed laugh at something Daniel had said just before the shutter clicked. Behind them on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle of the solar system. Pluto still missing from the corner. At the top of the screen, a banner had slid into place in the last half hour. A text message. Mr. Carr, this is Miss Harris from Noah's class. He asked me this morning when Daddy is coming to pick him up today. I told him Daddy is on a short trip. I hope you can come home soon. He missed breakfast buddies. Daniel held the phone without moving. Beyond the glass inside the conference room, a woman in charcoal silk laughed at something a man to her left had said. On the pale wall behind her, the MedCorp global logo glowed in soft blue, stretched wider than a man stood tall. A pharmaceutical company that 4 state attorneys general had only that January jointly sued for raising the price of insulin by 600% over a 4-year period. A company whose CEO had said in a deposition, transcribed and leaked the previous spring, that the American diabetic population was, and he had used this exact word, a market. That was the logo sitting at the back of the room, where Sarah's promise had been written into a company charter. Daniel put the phone back in his pocket. And because there was nothing else to do with the weight that had just settled across his chest, he let it rise and let it take him where it wanted to go. He was 29 again, in a 1-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner, and Martin was at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, eating cold pizza straight from the box and saying, "There are doors you have to lock while your mind is still clear." He was 41, and Sarah's hand was lighter than paper in his own, and she was whispering something he would carry for the rest of his life. He was 42, standing in a parking garage in the rain, watching paramedics wheel his best friend into an ambulance, and he was 43, 4 days later, listening to Martin make him promise to go home to his children. And he was this morning, crouched in a doorway, with the nightlight still on, in an 8-year-old's bedroom, looking at a crayon drawing that said in careful letters above a small red heart, "For everyone." Last week, Emma had climbed onto the arm of his chair while he was working at the kitchen table. She had rested her chin on the top of his head, the way she sometimes did when she was thinking too hard for her age, and she had said, "Daddy, does Mommy know what you're building for her?" He had told her he didn't know, that maybe she did, that he hoped so. It had not been the truth. The truth was that for 5 years quietly, he had been letting someone else build it for him because a man could not be in 2 places at once. The truth was that the thing Sarah had asked him to protect had been drifting. And he had known it was drifting. And he had told himself someone else was holding the wheel. 6 minutes had passed since he had sat down on the bench. Daniel stood. He did not hurry. He smoothed the front of his shirt, lifted the worn canvas satchel from the bench beside him, and began to walk down the glass corridor toward the conference room door. Brandon Mills, who had been speaking with a woman at the end of the hall, caught the movement out of the corner of his eye and turned the color draining out of his face as he realized what was about to happen. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to." Daniel did not stop. He reached the door of the conference room, placed his hand on the long silver handle, and pulled. 12 heads turned at once. The room was larger inside than it had looked from the hallway. A table of dark walnut ran the length of it, polished to the depth of still water. Around the table sat the senior leadership of Pinnacle Systems, and at the head of it, still on her feet, because she had been addressing the room when the door opened, stood Vivian Shaw. She was 48, and she wore her age the way certain women learned to, as an advantage rather than a weight. Her dark hair was pulled back into a low knot. Her silk blouse was the color of wet stone. A thin gold chain lay flat against her collarbone. In her right hand, she held a laser pointer she had not yet lowered. For perhaps a second, she did not recognize him. Then she did. To her credit, she did not flinch. Her expression did not change by any measure a stranger would have noticed. Only the small muscle at the hinge of her jaw tightened, and her grip on the pointer went very still. Daniel. Vivian. Behind him, Brandon had reached the doorway and was hovering there with both hands raised, caught between propriety and panic. Miss Shaw, I'm so sorry. I tried to... It's all right, Brandon. Should I call? Close the door, please. Brandon closed the door. Daniel walked the length of the room. 12 faces followed him without speaking. He could see halfway down the table a man with silver hair and a gray beard, the General Counsel Thomas Reed, sitting very still, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on Daniel's with the quiet intensity of a man who had been waiting for this moment for longer than anyone else in the room understood. At the head of the table was the chairman's seat. Daniel reached it, drew it out, and sat down. "Forgive the interruption," he said, in a voice that carried without effort to every corner of the room. "I'm Daniel Carr. I'm the majority founder and the controlling shareholder of this company. I own 52% of Pinnacle Systems, and I have not at any point in any document authorized the sale of this company to MedCorp Global or any of its subsidiaries." A silence settled on the room that was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of the moment after a glass breaks before anyone has moved to pick up the pieces. Vivian set the laser pointer down on the table. "Daniel," she said again, and her voice had not hurried. "You flew in from Boston for this. You could have called. Would you have picked up?" "Of course I would have." "The way you picked up in March and in May and twice in August." Her mouth tightened just enough. "Those were busy quarters. You know how the cycle..." "Vivian." She did not answer. The man seated to her right cleared his throat. He was heavy-set, mid-50s, with the kind of tailored suit that tried to disguise a bulk it could not, and Daniel recognized him without needing to be told. Lawrence Pruitt had been the chief financial officer for 7 years. Martin had hired him personally out of a firm in Chicago, and used to say with the wry affection he reserved for people he did not entirely trust that Pruitt could find $1 inside a stone. "Mr. Carr," Pruitt said, lifting his chin. "With respect, this acquisition has been reviewed by the board's Mergers and Acquisitions Committee over a period of 9 months. Every filing is in order. Every fiduciary duty has been observed. Counsel has signed off. I understand this is a surprise, but there is no irregularity here that warrants. I have the ghost drafts of the valuation memos, Mr. Pruitt, the ones from April before the adjustments. I have the original models from your own team showing the fair market price at $19.2 billion. I have the revised model you circulated in June showing 15.1. I have the email time-stamped June 17th in which you wrote to Ms. Shaw and suggested, and I quote from memory, that the variance was, quote, "well within the range an external auditor will accept without comment." Pruitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. Vivian Shaw took a slow breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was softer now, almost gentle. "Daniel, you walked away 5 years ago." "I did. You took your children and you went home to Boston, and you did not call, and you did not write. And for 5 years I have run this company. I have tripled its valuation. I have quadrupled its revenue. I have carried 19,000 employees on my back through 3 regulatory overhauls and a pandemic. You did not do that. I did that. I know. "Then you will understand," she said, and her eyes were very steady on his. "When I say that you are sitting at a table where you no longer belong. This company has moved on, Daniel. So should you." For the space of a breath, Daniel did not answer her. He looked at her across the long, polished wood, and he understood something that he had not understood on the flight down. He had thought all the way from Boston that he would find a thief in this room. What he had found instead was a woman who genuinely believed that the house she had been invited to live in was now the house she had built, and that the man sitting across from her was a trespasser from a life she had finished outgrowing. He remembered then a sentence he had read in a magazine profile of her the previous November. He had not thought much of it at the time. She had said, "There are houses you are invited into, and there are houses you have to build yourself. I have lived too long in someone else's house." He had read the line and smiled because it had sounded like her, and he had closed the magazine and gone to pick up the children from school. He understood the sentence now. "Vivian," he said quietly, "I'd like you to sit down. I beg your pardon. Please. Sit." She did not sit. Instead, she looked at Brandon, who was still standing near the door, and she said without raising her voice, "Brandon, call security." Brandon moved to the wall phone. Daniel did not look at him. He reached down, lifted the worn canvas satchel from the floor beside his chair, and set it on the table. He opened the flap, and from inside he drew out a single leather folder and laid it flat in front of him. "Before anyone walks through that door," he said, "I would like everyone at this table to understand what I'm about to invoke." In the original Articles of Incorporation of Pinnacle Systems, as filed in Delaware in 2008 and amended in 2012, there exists a provision called the Founders Clause, Article 9, Section 2. It was drafted by Martin Cole with the assistance of counsel in the aftermath of a hostile acquisition offer that year. Its language is very specific. In any event in which the company's executive leadership enters into a transaction that materially violates the founding mission of the company, or in which any self-dealing by executive leadership can be shown to the detriment of shareholder interest. The majority founder retains unilateral authority to suspend all pending executive decisions and assume temporary operational control of the company without a vote of the board. Two heads at least turned toward Thomas Reed. The general counsel did not move. He did not need to. His small, tired nod across the length of the table was enough. Daniel picked up the conference phone in the center of the table, dialed an internal extension from memory, and turned the speaker on. A woman's voice answered on the second ring. Corporate Secretary's office, Linda Hartwell speaking. "Linda, it's Daniel Carr." A silence came down the line that was not quite a silence. Then quietly, "Mr. Carr, it's been a long time." "Linda, I am in the 10th floor conference room, and I am formally invoking Article 9, Section 2 of the Corporate Charter, effective this moment. Please record the invocation in the corporate registry and issue the standard notice to the board within the hour." A sound on the other end of the line like a breath being let out after a long time held. "It will be recorded, Mr. Carr. The time is 10:31 a.m. Eastern." "Thank you, Linda." The line clicked. Daniel laid the leather folder open. Inside was every page he had spent the last 2 weeks assembling with 3 law firms and 3 forensic accountants. The revised valuation models with their deletions tracked. The side agreements with MedCorp Global naming personal transition bonuses in the amount of $180 million combined. The June 17th email, the August email, the October email, and at the very bottom of the stack, a single thin USB drive in a clear plastic case. Daniel took the drive out, plugged it into the port on the edge of the conference table, and pressed a button. A recording began to play. The audio was clear. The voices were unmistakable. In the first seconds of it, Lawrence Pruitt was laughing, and Vivian Shaw was saying in a tone of mild amusement that made the entire room go cold, "Carr is gone. He's home wiping noses. This is our harvest." The recording stopped. No one spoke. Daniel looked down the length of the table at the woman in charcoal silk, who had not sat down, whose face had not moved, whose hands rested flat against the polished walnut, as if she were holding the room in place by pressing down on it. "Vivian," he said. "You met Sarah once, at the Series B dinner 2011. You sat next to her. Do you remember what she said to you?" Vivian Shaw did not answer. She said, "Please help him keep the company from ever forgetting what it was built for. She made you promise." He closed the folder. "I remembered." And then, because there was nothing else to say that would not be cruelty, he said the last of it flat to the room without raising his voice. Effective immediately. Vivian Shaw is relieved as Chief Operating Officer of Pinnacle Systems. Lawrence Pruitt is relieved as Chief Financial Officer. Neither of you will sign another document on behalf of this company. Your access to this building is terminated as of this moment. Security will escort you to your offices to collect personal items. Nothing else. For the space of 3 long seconds, no one in the conference room moved. It was Pruitt who broke first. He stood up slowly the way a man stands when his knees have stopped, quite trusting him, and smoothed the front of his jacket. His eyes did not meet anyone's. "I'll clear my desk," he said to no one in particular. "I have personal files." He walked out of the conference room without waiting for an answer. Daniel watched him go. Vivian did not turn her head. She was still standing at the foot of the table, her hands flat on the wood, her face composed into the middle distance of a woman who had not yet decided whether she was still inside the room she was standing in. Thomas Reed rose from his seat. He walked the length of the table to where Daniel sat. He did not speak. He only laid one hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder, the way an old friend lays a hand on the shoulder of another after a funeral. And then he stepped back and said to the room at large, "I recommend a brief recess. 20 minutes. We have a great deal to discuss." The executives began to rise. 1 or 2 glanced at Vivian as they passed. None spoke to her. She did not watch them go. Daniel was halfway to the door, his satchel in his hand, when his phone began to vibrate. He answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Rachel Hayes, 13 years at Pinnacle, 8 of them, as head of infrastructure. When Rachel had first walked into Daniel's office, she had been 23 years old, carrying a resume that no firm in Manhattan would read past the second line, because her degree was from a community college in upstate New York, and she did not know how to sell herself in a room full of Ivy League suits. Daniel had hired her that afternoon. Her voice on the phone now was tight-pitched, lower than its natural register, and she did not start with hello. "Mr. Carr, are you still in the building?" "I am. I need you on the 8th floor. Now." "What's happening?" "Something is moving through the patient servers. Large volume. It's leaving the perimeter." Daniel ran. The 8th floor was the engineering core. He took the fire stairs 2 at a time. By the time he pushed through the stairwell door, Rachel was standing beside a wall of monitors, with 2 junior engineers at her shoulders, and the color of her face told him more than the numbers on the screens did. 2,300,000 patient records, she said, the moment he reached her. Medical histories, genomic data, the diagnostic models. It's pulling everything. Someone activated a remote mirror protocol about 6 minutes ago. Destination: a staging server registered to a holding company in Delaware. The holding company traces back in 2 hops to MedCorp Global. Daniel looked at the screens. The progress bar on the nearest one stood at 17%. "How long?" "At this rate, 90 minutes from start to finish. We've lost about 9 so far. I can call the police. I can call the FBI's cyber division. Either way, we're looking at hours before anyone arrives with the authority to act. By the time they do, it's gone. Can you stop it?" Her mouth tightened. "I can shut down every outbound pipeline at the core level. It kills the transfer. It also takes the company offline. Every hospital running on our system goes dark for at least 6 hours, while we bring it back up, segment by segment. Estimated revenue loss $40 million. Contract exposure probably more. Do you have the authority? She looked at him. I have Ms. Shaw's authority. Ms. Shaw was Chief Operating Officer until 32 minutes ago. You have mine. Mr. Carr, you are a shareholder. You are not an officer of this company. If I bring the network down on your word, and somebody successfully challenges the clause you invoked upstairs, I will have committed an unauthorized act, costing this company $40 million. I will lose my job. I will lose my license. I will probably lose my house. Daniel met her eyes. Rachel, I know. The progress bar clicked over to 18%. What he saw in that moment was not the man he had been upstairs. It was her face. And she was not looking at the man who had invoked the Founder's Clause in a conference room a floor away. She was looking at the man who had sat across a desk from her 13 years earlier when she was 23 years old and out of her depth in a city that had told her no 6 times that month, and who had said to her, I don't care where you went to school. I care whether you can build the thing I'm describing. Can you? She had said yes. She turned to the nearest engineer. Bring up the core interrupt. Rachel, bring it up. The engineer typed. A prompt appeared on the screen. Rachel rested her hand on the mouse. Confirm. Confirmed. She clicked. For a second, nothing seemed to happen. Then one by one, like a city turning off its streetlights, the indicator lights across the top of the monitor wall began to go amber, then red, then dark. The progress bar on the patient transfer stuttered, froze, and vanished. Rachel let out a breath that seemed to have been waiting inside her for a very long time. Stopped. We caught it with 11 minutes and change to spare. Her eyes closed for one short moment. When they opened, she was already running on to the next problem. I need to call every hospital on our network in the next hour. We have to keep people alive while we bring the system back up. Do it. She was already moving. The rest of that morning and the long afternoon that followed did not feel like a single day. Daniel took the call to MedCorp Global at 12:45 from the chairman's office on the 42nd floor, a room he had not set foot in for 5 years, where a framed photograph of Vivian with the governor of New York still sat on the credenza. He kept the call short. He informed the man on the other end that the transaction was void under Delaware law as of 10:31 that morning, that the forensic package documenting the self-dealing, the valuation fraud, and the attempted exfiltration of patient data was already in sealed escrow with 3 separate firms, and that any public statement from MedCorp contesting the termination would result in the unsealing of that package within the hour. The other man did not argue. He said very quietly, I understand. And the line went dead. By 3 in the afternoon, the trade press had the story. By 5, 2 cable networks had it. The stock fell 14%, rebounded 6%, and settled somewhere in between. The commentary cut 2 ways, as Daniel had known it would. Half the talking heads called him the prodigal father who had come back in time to save a company from itself. The other half called him a majority shareholder who had detonated a multi-billion-dollar transaction out of wounded vanity. He did not watch the coverage. For 3 days after Daniel did not leave the building before midnight. He did not take the chairman's office. He walked the floors. He sat on the corners of desks. He drank bad coffee out of paper cups with engineers, with the medical advisors on the 9th floor, with 3 quiet nurses who had left clinical practice to help Pinnacle build the triage models that now ran in 600 emergency rooms across the country. He asked them one by one what the company had been becoming when no one in this building had been watching it closely enough. He listened more than he spoke. On the 4th morning, he walked into Thomas Reed's office and closed the door behind him. Tom, I need a chief executive who remembers what we built this for. I can think of exactly one person in this building who does. Thomas Reed, the man who had sent a certain anonymous email from a certain coffee shop in Midtown 3 weeks earlier, because he had not been able to sleep for a month, looked up from a stack of filings, and said nothing at first. Then he said, "On an interim basis. For now. The board will vote in 90 days. We'll see what they decide." Understood. Brandon Mills came to Daniel's office on the 5th day. He did not bring his tablet. He did not bring a list of talking points. He stood in the doorway in a shirt whose collar he had not ironed that morning and said without prelude, "Mr. Carr, I had a rehearsal. I was going to give you a careful apology. I'm not going to give you that one." Daniel did not look up from the document he was signing. "Go ahead. When you walked into this lobby, I saw a man with no lanyard and no briefcase, and I decided he was no one. I didn't ask your name. I didn't offer you water. I made you sit on a bench for 6 minutes. I did it because I've been trained in this building to measure a man's worth by his suit. And I did it because Ms. Shaw trained me that way, and I never once asked whether I should. Okay. I'm not asking you not to fire me. I'm telling you that if you do, I'll understand." Daniel laid his pen down, and for the first time he looked at Brandon Mills across the desk. "I'm not going to fire you, Brandon. Sir, I need you to help me rebuild this lobby, not the marble, the part of it that walked past a man in a plain shirt and decided he was nobody. That part. I think you already know how because I think you've been ashamed of that part for longer than you've admitted to yourself. Am I right?" Brandon's eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. "Yes, sir. Then let's work." 1 month later, on a morning in early spring, the lobby of the tower on Madison Avenue was quiet. The marble had been polished before dawn. The light that fell through the tall windows was pale and slow, and lay in long, pale stripes across the floor. On the wall behind the reception desk, a single plate had been taken down, and 2 had been mounted in its place. Not the old ones, new in matte brass, the font restrained. The first read, "Founded by Daniel Carr and Martin Cole, 2008. Technology in the service of human beings." The stock had closed the previous afternoon at 9% above its prior all-time high. Daniel stood in front of the plate in silence. He had not come to the office that morning expecting to do so. He had been on his way out of a meeting on the 42nd floor, and the elevator had set him down without his asking on the ground. A young man came in through the revolving doors. He was perhaps 25. He wore a badge on a lanyard that looked new. He stopped a few feet from the wall, read the plates, and then turned and saw Daniel standing there, and for a moment he did not quite know what to do with his own face. "You're Daniel Carr." "I am. I started 2 weeks ago. I turned down a job at Google for this one." The young man's hands had found each other in front of him, the way hands do when a person is trying very hard not to say the thing they most want to say, and is about to say it anyway. "My little sister had a misdiagnosis when she was 7. 4 hospitals. Nobody talked to each other. She's okay now. She's in college. But I grew up hearing that story. And then I grew up hearing about your company. And I just wanted to say, I took this job because of what you built." Daniel did not answer right away. He reached out instead and let the tips of his fingers rest against the raised letters of the name beside his own and held them there long enough to feel the shape of it. Then he turned and he smiled at the young man, a small, tired, real smile, and he walked out through the doors of a building that had at last learned to recognize him again. Boston was cold when he pulled into the driveway at 6:15. Emma was on the front steps, a box of colored pencils open beside her, a sheet of drawing paper held flat against her knees. Noah was in the front yard, charging in an enormous circle around the maple tree, with the neighbor's golden retriever barking joyfully at his heels. Somewhere above the roofline, the last of the evening light was turning the color of honey. Noah saw the car first. He shouted something unintelligible, abandoned the dog, and sprinted toward the driveway. Halfway there, his feet tangled in the grass, and he went down flat on his stomach. His arms splayed, his face pressed into the cold lawn. For one short moment, he lay still. Then he got up, grass in his hair, grass on his chin, and kept running. Emma dropped her pencils and followed. Daniel knelt on the driveway. He caught Noah first and then Emma, and pulled them both against the front of his coat with the whole strength of his arms. Noah's small hands closed in fists around the lapels. Emma pressed her cheek against his chest hard and would not let go. "Daddy," Noah said, muffled against the wool. "Where did you go for so long?" Daniel held him tighter. "I went to remind some people," he said very quietly. "What your mother once asked us to do." Noah didn't understand. He was 6. He only burrowed closer. Emma lifted her face. She looked at her father without speaking, the way a child who has once asked a question and not received an answer looks at the person who has finally come home with the answer in their face. Then she said, "I finished drawing Mommy. Do you want to come see?" Daniel stood up with Noah in one arm. With his free hand, he took his daughter's. Together, the three of them walked up the path toward the yellow warmth of the front door, where on the kitchen table just inside a small wooden frame was waiting, and a red crayon heart, and the careful letters of a promise that had at last come home.